All right, now either I'm recording and you're recording, or I overwrote your recording, but something's going on. It's recording. This is good.
I've stopped recording, so you can record.
Okay,
So,
this is good. So essentially, picking up off of this ties into last week's podcast, which, by the way, was awesome. That was a
that was
conversation that I was really happy happened.
me too. That was a lot of fun. It was a long podcast. A couple people that were listening to it, they're like, "God, do you stop talking?" And I was like, "I do not." I was like, "You're in my daily life. You know that I don't stop talking."
I was gonna say, did they tap out in the middle? They're like, "All right, I'm good."
One of my friends was like, I stopped listening so I could go eat something, and I came back to it, and I was still interested, and I was like, yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. When
I
people
was
come
like,
back,
that's what we're looking for.
right, right on.
Yeah.
So this time it actually relates. I was thinking this time we could talk a bit about the military industrial complex and how that actually, in a fairly direct way, can feed into the. Well, I'll explain. We'll go into it, but we were having this conversation, I think last week or the week before, through text, and you were
Yeah.
talking about the Cold War, and there was a theory that you had named.
Yeah.
What was the
The
theory?
the industrial subsidy. I actually have it pulled up because we were talking about like 30 other things before this got
Sure,
started.
sure. I don't mean to put you on the spot. So, like,
Oh no.
as you pull that up, um, let's go back a little bit in history. So, kind of starting around the early 20th century, you have World War One, which I think
Right.
is a super interesting topic, and I'm glad that it's actually starting to get coverage now because it's mostly just been World War Two because of Hitler and the Holocaust.
It is, and while Hitler and the Holocaust obviously are a fascinating topic, and one that's you can delve into. I mean, I know I told you a little bit about some research that I want to do,
Mhm.
but keep it on the DL,
Sure.
just because I'm very excited about that. And at some point I will talk about that once I get like. Actually, I texted my poor freaking professor yesterday, and I was like, I know it's Saturday, but just hear me out.
Yeah.
And she was like, just write it down, we'll talk about it on Monday. But
You must have an interesting notepad.
oh my god, yeah, it like 90% of the time the iCloud thing will pop up and be like, it's full, and I'll be like, shh, I don't care.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay,
so
good.
what we were talking about was the military industrial complex, and then the military subsidy theory.
Okay.
But before we get into that, World War One, as you were just saying, and it's true, does not get nearly enough attention, especially for the precedent that it
Hmm.
set for kind of everything moving forward.
Yeah. It seems like that is not only just because it's more recent and because our grandparents were involved in it,
Yeah,
but also because World War II really upped it was a sequel that really upped the stakes of the original. I mean, not just in the major developments like we were talking about the Holocaust and the atomic bombings, but also this cast of characters that I think the First World War just didn't have. Like there were no FDR, Churchill, Mussolini, Stalin, Hitlers of the
you
First
know,
World War
I
that
was
I remember.
literally just gonna say cast of characters. I was gonna say it's like a complete recast. There's a whole set of different issues and stuff. And what's unfortunate but interesting is that we know so much about the big players of World War II. We know about the British White Paper and the Harrison Report and everything, and about the deplorability of the DP camps and whatnot.
By
But
the way,
if
could you explain those briefly? Because I'm not sure that I know exactly. Like I've probably heard of these things, but I just don't.
Sure, sure.
Can't place
So
them.
the Harrison Report is something I'm better versed in, so I'll just go off of that.
Okay.
The Harrison Report basically went to Eisenhower and was like, concentration camps are gone, and now there's displaced person camps,
Oh, okay.
which are essentially the same thing, same conditions, same, rampant typhus, same,
Hmm.
subhuman conditions, everything like that. And it was
There's
a
just
letter
no
to
final solution.
exactly, just no killings,
Yeah.
just dying on your own. So it was sent to Eisenhower, who was not super receptive, and then you've got Patton, and there's a lot of anti-Semitism that wasn't known about. But when you look at all that, and it's so well documented. I think last week you said that one of the great and terrible things about World War II is Germany was very good at documenting what
Oh.
had happened. World War One doesn't have the same coverage, if you
Mhm.
will, but at the same time, there's many other things that kind of tie it in and bring it back.
Sure. It's funny that you bring that up because I was just thinking about that the other day, how like you couldn't pick a more perfect combination of like when people question Holocaust statistics, like on the one side you have the group that is known for being phenomenal engineers and note takers who basically had meticulous notes on everything that they did in the Germans, right? And then on
Yeah.
the other side, you have people who are known for being like number crunchers and bankers, right? And like, so I like this is one statistical matchup that I don't really question.
Yeah, no, I mean it's two forces of incredible synergy when it comes to numbers and calculations.
Mhm.
It's funny because if you think about my ability to cough on command, I don't know. When you think about it, like you went to school for engineering,
Yeah.
right? So you're more the number cruncher, the statistics and everything, whereas I'm in school for English and whatnot.
Mhm.
So it's kind of funny when you look at World War One. It's almost like that. You've got the statistical side, which would be you.
Mhm.
People that talk too much would be me.
Oh, I talk too much too.
And
So
then if if you looked at World War Two, it would be like you'd be crunching the numbers, and I'd be like, hold on, I'm trying to write this down. Would you just slow down for like 10 seconds? um, but that was a parallel I never thought I'd make. Anyway, uh, so like you were saying, yeah, it's a well recorded time in history,
mhm.
and I think that for the World War One scholars that are out there, um, they don't get enough notoriety. They don't get enough um, credence to their subject, really.
Yeah. And this just popped into my head when you were talking about that is the technology as well, right? Like the actual documentation of
Yeah.
not just the statistics of the war, because I mean the statistics of World War II are just mind blowing, but actual the death toll, and then also the photos and the iconic images. Like in World War One, it was still more like drawings and propaganda, I think,
Eh,
and obviously tons of propaganda in World War II as well. But World War II was just that pre-Vietnam. Like Vietnam brought it the next level, where it was all
right.
like the worst aspects of war projected into people's living rooms every night. But
Right. With
World
World
War
War
II,
One,
yeah,
yeah, with World War One, what you saw a lot of was like in the trenches,
yes,
and you saw a lot of that where it's not that you weren't seeing humanity there; you were just seeing it in a different light.
mhm,
Whereas there's a lot of great films out there about World War Two, but there's a couple like The Long Way Home and things like that, and they're on YouTube, and I recommend them.
mhm.
Um,
That's about World War II or World War One.
World War Two,
Okay.
but the thing is, from there we really had more of like look at the depravement of humanity. We were really able to see more of the victim side of things as opposed to the perpetrator side of things.
Mhm.
um, and I mean, obviously we can see that in World War II, but that's not the biggest focus, whereas in World
Sure.
War One, what we remember from that, there's a very famous photo of shell shock,
Yeah.
um, with the guy whose eyes are just the 1,000-yard stare of PTSD.
Mhm.
And it's a real famous photo. I think it's just called shell shock, but it 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 it, it kind of puts a lot into perspective just of like, because with World War II, you think a lot about the victims and the survivors, whereas with World War One,
Excuse me.
isn't right. Um, uh, in World War One, you got a chance kind of to look more at the soldiers and stuff. Not that you didn't in World War II, but when people think World War II, they don't always necessarily go to the front lines.
Yeah, you're really onto something there because I am remembering it must have been. Have you ever listened to or heard of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast?
I have, yeah.
It's intense, but he was talking about how I believe in World War One that was the first. That was sort of our introduction to modern warfare, and not only the terror of human ingenuity in mass murder. You know, with all the like poison gas and dirigibles and machine guns and
Yeah,
flamethrowers and all that stuff and tanks. But also on top of that, it's the first time the war, it was almost like a paradigm shift of wars before that. And this is really the first war that actually had photography of any kind, even if though it was rudimentary.
true.
And before that, it was sort of the depictions of warfare were more romanticized and from the perspective of the not only the victor but the person who was like at the helm of the war and right like General Washington on his horseback standing over the battle, and you see the battle formations at a distance, and this really got into the nitty gritty horrors of everyday
Of,
human experience.
of course, and I mean you can make the argument that um, the silver. Come on, Sarah. Yeah, if you looked at my desk right now, you would see the madness of finals, and you would see why I've got a monster, and I'm just trying to keep it together. Anyway, um, the Civil War, there is some photography
Mm-hmm.
from it, but like you said, very rudimentary, and a lot more of just like posing.
Yeah,
Like, this is my unit, and in 3 days these people will be gone, that
sure.
type of thing. But as far as World War One goes, the like you said, the romanticism was kind of taken out of it. This was us getting like a real raw, this is what we're looking at. And then World War II wasn't that far after. And after World War II, as people are recovering, there's all these other factions of things that are going on. And then obviously you Vietnam, and that was a game changer, but it's a whole other thing. But back on the point of World War One, it's something that I guess the best way I would think of going about even beginning to try to dissect it is kind of not what went wrong or what went right, but just what went and what stuck, because
Mhm.
I'm sure, as sure as we're sitting here today, that there is so much that was missed and so many opportunities that we could have used to learn or to grow or to kind of rewire the way that the quote unquote war machine works,
Mhm.
that we missed because we didn't have the technology, that maybe now we overcompensate for with the technology we have now.
Ooh, that's pretty compelling. There's a lot going on there.
Uh,
I think World War One is it sort of has to be the place to start. I'm not saying that it's the be all and end all, but it set the stage for everything to come. And I've yet to read this yet, but this was recommended by my friend, A Shattered Peace. I know there's a reflection there, but this is
yeah, I see
so
it.
with World War One. There's the factors that went into setting the stage for the war, the powder keg in Europe, and the nationalism and imperialism and all those isms that I remember talking about in history class coming together and merging and melding and whatnot. And then there's the after effect, the Treaty of Versailles, which basically set not only the conflicts for the basically next century, but the world as it is today, the political lines that were drawn on the map and everything.
And the Treaty of Versailles also kind of provided a template for like the Balfour Declaration and things
Mhm.
like that kind of was like, okay,
The
we're
creation
gonna
of
do
Israel,
this.
that's what Balfour Declaration is.
Yeah, that's in World War II. That's towards Israeli Zionism and things like that. But
Okay.
if you obviously they're not one and the same, but if you look at the way documents were done, a lot of it was relatively similar. And when you kind of start putting the pieces together and
Hmm.
stuff, you can see a pretty consistent thread of just kind of going along the same lines, but not ever getting anywhere. That's the one thing that I find with major wars. Not that I'm in any sort of expertise position to say that, oh well, I find with the wars.
Yeah.
But one thing is that it almost feels like whatever could have been learned from that we learned a lot, but
Hmm.
we could have learned more in a more effective way with less damage.
Yeah, this is the hindsight is 2020 thing.
I'm calling this the year of hindsight. 2020 is the year of hindsight because I mean it's not even May yet and it's all gone to hell. So
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, you're right.
um,
It's there's so many. You think about how quickly in situations like that documentation gets stacked up and assessments of the situation, and probably now we've only still gotten through like 20% of every recorded piece of information or study of what went on then, because the next thing happens and then the next thing and then that you just the growth of information is far beyond the human capacity to evaluate it. So you
there
have to do this stuff on the fly, right?
and there has to be those historians that want to sit there and comb through some stuff that has got to be mind-numbingly boring, but
Oh yeah.
then you have the stuff that you get the journals from the front lines and it's fascinating
Hmm.
stuff, and then you get the hidden journals from POWs and things like that. um there's journal I don't remember the name of the book for the life of me, but there's a compilation of journals from one of the Japanese internment camps, um, that is just heartbreaking. And I got my hands on it years ago. I wish I could remember the name of it, but um, it's. I'll say this now, and it makes me sound old, and I don't care because you're like my age, or
Sometimes it's
you're
good to sound old though. It depends what
uh,
exactly you're saying.
well, you're a year younger than me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so stay with me on this one, and I feel like you'll relate here.
Mhm.
Our generation does not read enough.
Yeah. Long form thought it's partly like the lack of interest and it's partly just I'd rather bite-sized information, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, like a perfect example was I was at school when I was able to be there, and I was reading a book, and someone was like, "What class is that for?" And I was like, "Oh, it's not. It's just a book." And they just looked at me like I unexpectedly switched languages on them.
Why
And they were
would
like,
one do that? Why
"I
would
know."
one
They
read
were
a
like,
long form
"Why?"
thing?
They were like, "Why?" And I was like, "It's interesting. Do you want to
Yeah.
hear? You're walking away. You don't want to hear about it. Okay." And then back to my book.
Mhm.
Um, I think, and I mean, it's a pipe dream, but if people our age put in, I mean, like, you and I are both voracious readers.
Mhm.
We go back and forth. Like, I don't know how many books a week do you think you read?
Books a week. I'm not at that metric yet. I'm actually a fairly slow reader, but despite the stack of books that I have, I'm I read in a way that is like I'm digesting like
Right.
a bit of it. So maybe if I'm lucky, I'll get through like one a week. But I'm like the way that I read also is like I'll have three or four books started and I'll kind of switch between them.
Right.
And
Like, because I was gonna say, at any given time, I have like four books going.
yeah.
Two of them for because I want to, and then like I've got this chilling on my desk because I'm writing a paper on it
Mhm.
right now. And it's like I read it, but woohoo!
Yeah.
But if anyone was, and I'm not saying that there aren't, but I just don't know a lot of people that read
Mhm.
as in depth, or as much as either of us do. And I feel like if like 1/10 of that energy went in, there would be a lot less confusion, a lot less confliction with ideas solely because you're misinformed.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have to be like, hey, don't inject yourself with bleach. Just an idea.
It's assessing for yourself, thinking at a deeper level, following long form argument, and
Yeah.
ultimately, if you get in the habit of doing that, then you won't just accept what people tell you, and it will make you potentially much less ideological. You know,
Of
you're not
course.
just going to take some pre-digested piece of narrative that somebody tells you is the truth. It probably makes you less susceptible to the things that I try to talk about a lot in this podcast: cults, scams, mass movements, ideologies, all these things that people just absorb and go, yes, I'm following you. Take my money. Take my what do you want me to do?
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think that thought pathology itself is in itself is fascinating, and I mean you know that, but um, I just pick up a book. Like if anybody takes anything from me talking, just pick up a book. You know?
yeah, pick up a book, and also, I mean, it is an immense disservice the way that education is, like, we put a huge emphasis on education, rightfully so, in this country, but
Yeah.
we sort of stopped after that, and we really didn't emphasize on what was being taught or how it was being taught. And one of the first books that I read that, or that I started to read, that was critical of the way things were taught, was a book called Burn Math Class, which is saying that the way that math is taught basically encourages people to hate math because they go, I don't understand what the hell is going on. It doesn't show you things in a way that is like, that teaches you how to do it. It sort of shows you a specific problem, and then once you know how to do that problem, you don't know how to do anything outside that problem of similar problems.
Yeah.
So it doesn't teach you like general rules as it ought to. And I'm saying it as if the subject teaches itself. I'm saying teachers don't teach this way, or the curriculums that
Right.
are given to them don't encourage them to teach this way.
Yeah,
So
and there's oh sorry, I cut you
no,
off.
that's you can comment.
I was just gonna say, teachers on a whole are out there to try to help you understand. I mean, like,
Mhm.
again, if any math teacher I ever had is listening, I am so sorry. I tried. I really did.
Yeah.
But, it's not applicable. Like it is and it isn't applicable across the spectrum like a certain formula. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but like, I for someone like me, math and stuff, the stuff I needed to know was there till I took the test and then it was gone.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking about this. There, just thinking about World War One and stuff. We didn't learn a lot about it in high school, right?
Mhm.
The history in high school, we focused on, you want to know about Mesopotamia because that has been drilled into my head,
Yeah.
like, or and the mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell. But I
Mhm.
can't tell you about the stuff that really would be able to allow me to sit down and have a conversation about. I mean, up till I did my own research, but if I was coming right out of high school and wanted to have a conversation about policies and treaties and stuff like that, I haven't been prepared for it. And it's not at the fault of any teacher I had. I had some great teachers,
Mhm.
but it's the way our education system is set up.
Yes.
So you either become an independent learner and you find the things that you find fascinating and you follow them
Mhm.
and you decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to learn about, or you go, well, that sucked, on to doing something else.
Yeah, and so many people do that, and that's not a good thing. And and I mean, this is going to come up. This is going, particularly as um, technology progresses and artificial intelligence becomes a bigger thing that people focus on. But there is a difference between education and intelligence,
Yeah.
and I think that intelligence is heavily like education more education helps you more depending on how intelligent you are. And I'm not saying intelligent is entirely inborn. There's a combination of factors with intelligence, but like education is more of like your library of knowledge in your head, and yeah, education and knowledge kind of like interchangeable in a way.
I
But
would say in there
intelligence,
you got to throw in retention too.
retention, sure.
Education, retention, and intelligence, because you can be like Einstein, super
Yes.
smart, didn't care about education, or not didn't care about education, but just wasn't the right way for him to get the the material he needed and to retain it.
Yeah, and I think about all the brilliant people who drop out of school because the structured format of that thing that's like, hey, you're going to learn this way. And like, I mean, I had a podcast recently about where I talked with a guy, Rob Montz, about education, and he's saying like, now education is generally to try to, um, what's the, uh, cause people to conform, basically
Streamline.
conform, yeah, streamline them on like cultural standards and things like that, rather than to get them to think independently and be creative and all this stuff. That's kind of like, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, the opposite of what education is, formal education.
Yeah.
So I bring this up in the difference in intelligence and education, because I think intelligence is more like how you process information, how quickly you can process it, how many things you can keep in your active memory at once and flip between. Like, think about your computer, how many tasks you have open and that kind of stuff. So, but I think that intelligence is heavily based on, instead of on rote memorization. Like, and by the way, this ties into history. I know this is a little tangent, but instead of just rote
How
memorization,
do I talk? Come on. You know?
it's pattern recognition. And this is what we lose track of is, if you focus on pattern recognition, you can learn math more effectively because you can see problems that are similar to each other and then understand how to do a whole class or family of problems rather than just that one problem that you studied how to do. And it's the same thing in history. It's so unfortunate. I loved history in school, but it's so unfortunate the way that it's taught, that it's okay, remember these dates, remember these names, remember these inventions. It's just this rote memorization. And what makes history come to life and what makes it important are the patterns, the trends, the ideas that weave throughout history, and you can see them pop up here, pop up there, and it makes history come to life when you pursue history through that avenue.
100%. No, I completely agree with that, because in high school we would spend maybe 2 weeks on the Holocaust, and
Mhm.
that was my time to shine,
Yeah.
because that was my history, and I was like, no, this, y'all sit down, this is my time.
Yeah.
But we would only spend 2 weeks on that, and if that's what if that's what World War II got, World War One got like a day.
Mhm.
And that's the thing, like, everything for the most part is linear, right? So if you're going for education and you're going for the most streamlined effect to have kids and teenagers remember stuff, you gotta do it based on the way that is gonna work for each individual kid, which is tough in a public school setting. But at the
Yeah.
same time, if you go to the amount of studies and you go to the amount of work that's been done on it's very much, like, here's some tangible examples of this not working.
Mhm.
How about kind of rewire things a little bit?
Yeah, and I think that there's going to be more of an emphasis on individualized learning moving forward,
I
probably
hope so.
with the help of technology and artificial intelligence, like sort of picking specific learning styles and subjects that allow people to pursue the path that interests them and engages them most. That's what I'm optimistic. But okay,
And just
back to oh, did you?
one
Sure.
quick thing, I just want to throw this out there because it's not said enough. If academia, like traditional academia, isn't for you, but you want to learn a trade or something, it's shit on so much by people. And
It's
I think that is ridiculous. I think it is so important to have those people out there that are like, I'm not into school, but I'm into cars, planes, whatever. I think that that is phenomenal, and I just want that out there because I sit here and I talk about school a lot because that's what I like. But I just think that the people that have the mechanical minds and mechanical hands and want to do that, society should not look at them the way that they do and go, oh well, you're not really trying,
Yeah.
and I think that's so important just to throw out there
Mhm.
because like I think they're just phenomenal, and I wish I had like a trade that I could go, yeah, I know how to do that. Like I'm an EMT, but I'm not practicing or anything like that. So, and you know what, with everything going on, shout out to the EMTs and emergency medical staff out there. That's oh, just oh,
Well said, by the way, the EMT thing and just about vocational education, because yeah, I mean, we've in the past stigmatized it, and we have unfortunately sent people who would have been phenomenal in vocational education onto paths of debt by
yeah,
telling them that this is your only ticket to the American dream, whatever that like vague thing that is the American dream. Like we culturally define it in certain ways at certain times, and it might have been, hey, you need to own a house, and then that leads to the '08 financial crisis mortgage meltdown, and then, hey, you need to have a college education because this is the only way you're going to be successful or appreciated or respected, or the only way that you're going to get social status or anything like. And then so people
ex-
pursue that, and then
exactly,
it's like it's not equally advantageous to everyone, because first of all, that's not how everybody learns. Second of all, it matters what you study. Second of all, it matters how you finance it. Third of all, college education hasn't always cost the same, and it doesn't always afford the same social benefit depending on the era. So
exactly. I mean, 10 years ago in high school, if you had told me now that I would be on the path to everything that I want to do academically, I'd have been like, okay. But the breaks that I took to do different things, like own a business, become an EMT, everything else that I did, it led me back to where I am now. And that's how I figured out what I liked. And as for so many other people that have gone the vocational route, like, you know, hats off to you guys because you figured out what you liked. You didn't listen to everybody else that said, oh, you have to go to school, get a job, blah, 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 blah.
mhm, they sold
Credential,
the dream, really, right?
yeah, credentials matter for what you want to do if that's what counts. Like if, for instance, if I want to someday, teach at a university level or curate at a museum or something, I need those credentials. I need those post-nominal letters that show that I can do those things.
Mhm.
But not everybody does. It's your own path, and I just felt it was important to say that vocational school, vocations in general, really should be taught more in general in public school. There shouldn't have to be like a separate like where we grew up. There was like, oh, you either went to high school or you went to the
Mhm.
vocational high school, and there was like this stigma about it too. Just stupid. These kids went to school and learned something like a trade and came out of there with knowledge and okay, I have this whole skill. Whereas we came out of high school with abnormally large calves because we didn't have stairs. Like that was it.
A lot of sort of useless stuff, and
Yeah.
lacking in life skills and lacking in perspective. Well, maybe perhaps overconfident, lacking in life skills and perspective.
Yeah, because our high school made like the like 50 top public high schools for being freaking difficult. Um
Yeah, and
and
by the way, I don't think either of us mean to like totally shit on our high school, because there were like the
oh
principals,
yeah,
there were a lot of teachers that were great. This is just a criticism of more of the institution of education as it is.
exactly. Like for as much as I say I hated high school and some of the social aspects, there are teachers there that to this day I still talk to and shaped me as a person, and some of like the way that I think about things, the way that I carry myself and the things that I like, just some of the habits that I've gotten into.
Mhm.
So yeah, we both attended North Reading High School, and there were some absolutely phenomenal teachers that we had. I think I can speak for both of us. when I say that without them, we wouldn't be doing the same things that we are doing now.
Mhm.
Because I know for me, even with, Mr. Putnam, for example, who said don't major in English, um, he he drove me to want to do better. Because, and same with Mr. Spinney, same with Mr. Shea, and God, Mrs. Sullivan, and a million different people
You've
that
gone to the dangerous place of naming like a critical number of people where if you've left one or two out, they're going to be, I'm sure they're all listening to this, or they will,
definitely
they're going to find you.
they're gonna find me and yell at me. No, but the good thing is too, when I do go back to North Reading, which isn't often, but when I do, if I see them, it's always a warm welcome, which I think is a testament to the fact that we did have teachers that gave a shit about us,
Yeah.
even when we were little shitheads that didn't give a
Oh,
shit
I
about
was.
them.
So I thank them for enduring that.
Me too. I owe them all like a cake
Hmm.
and a big apology because
Yeah,
I was awful.
me too.
Anyway,
Well, this is an example of like something that is entirely off topic, but a gem of a conversation. And this is actually really important because you mentioned before that, everything is linear, but this is actually something that like conversation and thought shouldn't be linear. And in the past, we used to think that it had to be. And I think that we're entering this world of nonlinear thought and
yeah,
connecting things in way like it's like the brain with all the neurons and everything connected in weird ways and in weird ways that you wouldn't expect. Like that's sort of our awareness, our consciousness, the way that we think ought to become more like that for us to really see the world in its full complexity, I think. Um, so,
yeah,
okay, World War One I brought up because ultimately we got into World War One. Woodrow Wilson um, ran on the not going to war platform, and then he got us into war because it was made clear to him through his economic advisors that essentially there was no way that the British were going to repay their debt if the U.S. didn't intervene to like because I think we were lending. I think that was the Lend Lease Act. Like we were lending ships, and
yes.
we weren't actually in the war, but we were contributing to the war effort. And so at some point, it
We
became
were
that we were. Yeah, go ahead.
we were actively inactive participants for a while.
Yeah, one of those like yeah, you'll find this is a major trend in American involvement over the 20th and 21st centuries is it's never really official war. It's always like some pseudo status.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing being, and again, this is not a comment on the American military or anything like that, but there's a history of if we were there and it went well, we were there. If
Yeah,
we were there and it didn't go well, we were, we saw it, but
yeah,
that's about it,
yeah. It was
It,
it was
it
bad. It was
happened,
unstable. It was an intervention, not a war.
yeah, it was a very heated conversation. Let's go with that. You
Exactly. So I guess that's how the United States really started to change course. And Wilson realized, okay, well, we're going to have to, in the economy, I don't know the exact state of the economy at that point, but it Wilson knew that there was going to be a benefit, sort of an economic stimulus to getting involved in the war, and that we would get our debts repaid.
Right.
So he sort of did this incredible 180 and convinced had and this is where you'll see this name again later on or you'll hear it later on. Edward Bernays, the guy who became like Madison Avenue's propaganda public relations manager, got his
Yeah.
start during World War One, convincing the American public through a massive PR campaign that it was worth going to war and that it was patriotic and all this. That's the initial push into this. Um, okay,
I'd
so that's
say,
why I bring up World War One, and then World War One sets the stage in many ways for World War Two, which I don't think we need to get into right now. Look it up
yeah.
if you don't trust us. And
Or
then
just, find me on social media. I will talk your ear off.
exactly, yeah. Yeah, find us, talk with us. We'll have the conversation. And then, so you get to the end of World War II, and the stage is set for, okay, well, actually, we should start just prior to World War II. So you have the Depression, and then the New Deal was trying to get us out of the Depression. And then, really, World War II, I think that a lot of people agree, the buildup, the economic buildup of preparing for war really brought the economy back
Yeah.
largely.
And then when you start thinking about like the external, well, not even external factors, but like the first thing that pops in my head is Rosie the Riveter,
Yes.
you know, for women in the war effort and things like that. And, um, you know, you said public relations and stuff, and patriotism when it
Yeah.
comes to war. I think that that is kind of universal for all the wars that America has inserted itself into, whether we really needed to be there or not. Um, the whole, you know, like after 9/11, the amount of patriotism that came about was incredible. And obviously there's not as much, you know, recorded from the World War I era, but I have to believe that there was a lot of like, hey, if you love your country, hop on board, because shit's about to get wild and you can be a part of it.
Yeah, and there was some pretty cringeworthy stuff, like I think it was the feather campaign, where the women would, I think they would, man, I'm gonna botch this, but basically, like, they would
I
pressure men,
got you. I'll
they would pressure men who weren't enlisted by almost like a scarlet letter. I think they would put like a feather on them, and that would mark them as sort of a coward for not having enlisted. So the military was using young women. It was using like sexual enticement slash shaming to encourage men to enlist.
Yeah. In World War I, it was to shame men into enlisting into the British Army.
Okay.
Um, Yep. Women to it was, you know, persuading women to present them with a white feather if they weren't wearing a uniform, and it it had a domino effect in the sense of like, well, I don't want to be perceived as weak, so
Yeah.
off we go, you know. And it
Yeah.
was actually interesting too. Just again, random side note, because you know, linear conversation.
Mhm.
um, Feathers on a whole are symbolic of freedom. Like if you've watched Forrest Gump, like everyone has,
Yeah.
the feather that goes throughout the entire narrative is that freedom and
I wondered about.
childlike wonder for Forrest. And it's interesting that it would be a feather campaign, because it would be like a it would take something that's so innocent, and it's also a sign of innocence and pure, and it's like, now you're a loser because you have a feather on you.
Yeah, it's sort of like perverting purity, which is sort of also what happened in World War II, where it was like Hitler was like, okay, it's Aryan is purity and white is pure, and meanwhile they're doing this horrific shit.
Yeah.
It's like
it
it like war and the darker side of human nature can do that. Is it twists in a very psychological way what is, you know, moral or ethical or pure, and yeah.
yeah, in any wartime scenario, I don't think that there's one iota of sensible, that's the word I was just going to use, like ethicalism, that's not a word.
Make it up.
Sensible ethics. Like there's nobody going like, this is ethically correct, and this is a great way to show you.
Mhm.
It's like, do it or you're a coward. White people are the best, but are doing terrible things. You know, it's so backwards, and it doesn't make sense. And you know, that's one of the very unfortunate things about, I think, any war that we found ourselves in, or just any conflict in general.
Mhm.
um, Going all the way back to like the Revolutionary War, you know.
Well, yeah, basically, I mean, if you think about a military, its sole purpose, or one of its sole purposes, is to strip enlisted men of their individuality so that they don't think for themselves. It encourages them to be regimented and to spend as little time alone as possible. That's why you have like buddies and you know,
You
your
got your battle buddy.
yeah, you don't want to give people time to think and to say, huh, this doesn't make sense, or to reconcile the contradictions that they see, or to basically start to piece together. I think this is propaganda. I don't like, I think that the reasons why we're doing this don't really make much sense. And what I'm seeing doesn't match what I'm being told, all things like that.
Yeah. One thing that I just got me thinking about the Revolutionary War, like we grew up near Lexington and Concord, so obviously we had many field trips there. And now I live near Plymouth Plantation, and I go by it, and I'm just like, oh, it's awful. If you grew up in Massachusetts, you get it.
Yeah.
But there's just gonna flex the nerdy side for a second. The Assassin's Creed franchise. What?
Flicks away.
All right, the Assassin's Creed video game franchise.
Oh, I loved that for a while.
Oh my god. I'm about to replay, or actually no, I haven't played through Rogue yet, so I'm gonna play through that. But I want to replay the third one because it's set in Boston during
I never played that. That looked awesome.
oh my god, dude, you need to play it because number one, you go into like Faneuil Hall and stuff, and it looks the same.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
that's cool.
But there's a whole mission in there to tear down propaganda.
Hmm.
And like I just thought about that for a second, and I was just like, oh, how about that? You know, and when you're playing it, you learn a little bit along with it, and then it aligns with all these historical events. And yes, like if you've played the series, you know that you can't jump off the top of something into a pile of leaves and be fine.
Yeah.
It just does not work
Yeah.
that way. Tried it, doesn't work. Just drives up your healthcare premium, but but um but it's one of those things where like you can take history and kind of put it into a little bit of perspective for people that don't really pay attention to it.
Hmm.
And in that, that got me thinking about it because like games like Call of Duty too, like they have a Vietnam one, they have ones that are they have one based in World War One, and it's probably the shortest campaign out there. Just think about that for a second. It's the shortest campaign game
Mm.
because there's just not enough that's been documented or known or that anyone's bothered to go through. And again, it's all speculation. I'm not there. I don't know. But if you stop and think about it, maybe there's some credence to that, and I will dial down the nerd for a little bit. But
That's sad that that there don't exist games like that. By the way, in the games about World War One, I'm saying, in
yeah,
the year of, I don't know much about video games. I enjoy them, but I don't play very many. But there's a game that I saw um, clips of recently, and it looked awesome. Have you ever played Wolfenstein 2?
Returned it. Yeah, I have. I played the original one on the OG Xbox. Like I've been playing video games for a while.
The like the latest like high CGI, like super intense graphics.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody that knows, like anyone from Best Buy that I work with that I am going to send this link to,
Mhm.
y'all know I need a PS4 because I want to play it. But you know, we all talk about video games a lot, and that one does come up. I think all of us have our own different desires to
Yeah.
play it, but like I'm that person. History-based games, I'm on it, and if it's not right, someone's hearing about it.
It looked like it was. I was just watching clips of it. I was like, I feel I've never really just sat down and watched clips of a video game before, but I was like, this
Yeah,
appeals to every like inner element of nerd in me. And it's like I tried watching The Man in the High Castle
yeah,
on what is it, Amazon, and I got like a half episode in, and I was like, eh. But this is
yeah,
the same kind of alternative history where it's like if I think if Nazis had basically won World War II or something like that, or taken over the U.S. mainland, it it looked crazy. So anyway, that's my take on video games for age.
no, as far as video games go, I mean, there's another great one right now, or that I'm waiting for the sequel to, called The Last of Us, that just aligns way too well with, there's a pandemic in the game.
Yeah.
Starts off with a character named Sarah too, who gets shot, and I don't like that, but and dies pre-pandemic. But there's a pandemic, and it's all about being in quarantine and survivors and looters and things like that. And I'm just like, this is making me uncomfortable because it's a virus. But
Yeah.
as far as I know, COVID-19 does not turn you into a zombie. I hope.
I bet there's been an upsurge in people watching The Walking Dead,
For
watching
sure.
Contagion, and playing Pandemic during this. I don't doubt that people.
Oh yeah, no, it's come up in conversation plenty of times, and I think it not only is it a diversion from reality, but it's also like life imitating art.
Yeah.
But that aside, I mean, typically I'll go for more like reality based games, or history based games, just because it's, especially with the Assassin's Creed stuff, I hadn't played it, and the first one I played was the one set in Boston. Fascinating and accurate, especially because like grew up near there, know about it, and I was like, plus the graphics were incredible.
Maybe I'll make a friend with a console. Maybe I'll force them to buy it or buy it for them, and like, because I don't really want to get myself into that hole of video games. But there's a couple of games, Red Dead Redemption,
I want to play that.
all these games that, yeah. So
I'll tell you what, we'll go halfsies on a PS4. All right, we'll go halfsies on a PS4.
we'll split it in half, and each one of us,
Exactly, and then we'll have to get together, put it back together.
or like each one of us takes half of the components, like 50% of the screws and the plastic.
Yeah,
I don't know how to put this back together.
I get it for Jewish holidays,
Yes.
things like that. Or just one of us has the console and the other one has the controller, because you can't have one without the other.
It's like a 21st century divorce.
Yeah. It's like, I get the HDMI cables and the controller. You hold on to don't hurt the console. Swear to God.
It could work.
All right, so it's expensive. We'll go halfsies on it and figure it out.
Okay, so we're at World War II, where we skipped a bunch of stuff with World War II, but coming out of World War II, the economy is booming,
Yes.
and there's this divergence of like, okay, or there's this idea of how do we keep this booming economy if we're not at war, right?
Right.
So there were these two tracks that were followed. One of which was, okay, we need a new enemy, and I'm not saying that this is exactly how it happened. Like, people sat down and simply said, we need a new enemy. But like,
You
don't know. Yeah, coming out of World War II, the Soviets, obviously, they were the other big world power. And so it became a bipolar battle, a dual, bipolar.
Yeah.
Bipolar disorder. Battle between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and that took the place of, that was like a constant crisis, like keeping the crisis mode of war flowing so that people are panicked, and you can sort of strip people, or at least get them to cede their liberties for security, is a common theme through the 20th century. And we don't realize this because it's like the situation that we were born into, but it's very much like the new normal that became established over the 20th century in the US.
100%. We've it's almost like we've become complacent
Yeah.
to what we've been told, which
Pretty
is
much.
very like, hipstery, like you said it, so that type of thing. But we, like you said, we were born into it. We were born into, this is how it is. And for, like, I mean, we're 90s kids, but for people that are born 2001 and on, all they've known their whole life is that we're at war.
Yeah.
And wow, that is, like, I mean, I know it like from a logical standpoint, but when you stop and think about it, like kids that are like 19, 20 years old, all they've known is that their entire life we've been at war.
Yes.
And how, like there's so many of us that grew up, we saw the towers go down, and all those years later, we're in uniform going to fight the same battle that we were in grade school.
Yeah. It
It's
fades
nuts.
into the background.
It does.
It hasn't been a total war like World War II or the Civil War or the American Revolution, where like all aspects of society are engaged in the war pretty much, or the war effort.
Yeah.
So it just disappears into the background.
It just becomes part of life. It becomes like
Yeah.
it
Look at how
unfortunately.
quickly people adapt. I mean, look at 4 years ago where we're like, this guy will never become president. It's is ridiculous. And then everybody was freaking out. I'm not saying people still aren't freaked out, but like people adapted to Donald Trump. A lot of the things that we didn't think we would adapt to. I'm not saying that people aren't still,
Oh yeah, no, I
but like, and the same thing with this virus is it's only been like, and I'm not saying we're out of it or anything like that, but like people adapt over time.
yeah, like
Work
we're
to establish themselves.
yeah, like we're adapting now. You know, we're figuring out our new normal. I was watching a press release with Governor Cuomo
Mhm.
earlier today. Uh, like very baseline, rudimentary, rephasing and like restarting, and how things are going to go.
Mhm.
Which I mean is great to hear and also kind of scary.
Yeah.
You know, and I was I was out with my dad because we just I mean like boredom has driven me quite far. Like I think you saw it on social media. We built a fire pit. It was great.
That's awesome.
And I can't wait to have people over and just like be like, hey, we're near each other. How you doing? There's a great meme out there that like, huh?
The little things.
Yeah, there's a great meme out there that's like, when all this is over, like, prepare yourselves. I'm gonna hug you for a really long time. Like, it's gonna be weird. Get ready.
Yeah.
Um,
Someone
but
puts their hand on your on your.
I know I'm gonna be like, someone will just be like, you know what? I'm all right with it. Leave it there. But we we were building it, and when I went out with my dad to get the stuff, like we were in masks and stuff, and then I ordered a good one because I had like kind of like a makeshift one.
Hmm.
Um, and it was crazy to see that this is like our new normal. Everyone's wearing masks and
Yeah.
staying far away from each other, and it's adaptability, but like you also got to think about kids that are going to be born into this.
Yeah.
It's my hope, and I think a fair hope, that this isn't gonna keep going to
Mhm.
the point where like kids that are born, like let's say a baby's born today, it's not gonna be like 5 years old and this is still gonna be happening. It's not gonna be 2 years old and this is still gonna be happening to the length that it is.
Yeah.
Um, if it was, I give up. I will see you on the moon. I am tired of dealing with this. But it'll be that'll be their normal, just like all these kids that are growing up after 9/11. That's their normal. Okay, we're at
School
war.
shootings are normal.
Yeah, no, there's school shooting drills.
Yeah.
There's I read this one thing right after Newtown that this little girl was getting shoes, and they lit up, and she like had a meltdown in the store, and she was like, her mom was like, what's wrong, and she said, they light up, the shooter can find me. This kid's
Whoa.
like 7. It's so sad to think that like that's where the brain goes immediately.
Yeah, that would put me at pause witnessing that.
Yeah, I mean I read about it, but I mean like if I saw that, I would just be like, wow, you
It,
know.
it's fucked up, but it's inspiring at the same time because you see how humans are adaptable, and it can be
Yeah,
great in the sense of when things are terrible, people can have a sense of optimism and morale and can like come together and survive and stuff like that. But it can also be put to bad uses where people lose track of things that shouldn't be, and it can become a slow ratchet, right? Where like people lose liberty
right.
and exchange that for security, and then they, the original threat disappears, and the people who are in power say, well, how can we maintain this sense of power that people gave us because we like it, and it allows us to do things more easily.
Yeah,
So they manufacture it. Like, I mean, I haven't read that Noam Chomsky book, Manufacturing Consent, but there's definitely a manufacture of crises that occurs. And
definitely.
this is what we were talking about is sort of not that the Soviet Union and the communists didn't present a legitimate threat, but there was absolutely ratcheting up of that threat to get people to, like, one example, when JFK was running for president, he talked about this missile gap that existed where the Soviets had, like, oh, they have 10 times more missiles than we have. You have to, if I'm elected, I will close the missile gap. And the whole thing was a myth. Like,
Yeah,
it was just, throughout the Cold War, there was so much, it was like interpreting the most questionable intelligence, if you could even call it intelligence,
yeah.
and and it was our intelligence agencies, which were established post World War. Well, actually, FBI existed prior to World War II, but CIA came in.
The basis of it did,
Yeah,
anyway.
and it was our intelligence agencies leaned towards telling the president what the president wanted to hear. Essentially,
Exactly.
that's not their job. They're supposed to
No.
gather intelligence, not manufacture agreement to
Yeah.
with the president.
And intelligence isn't what you want to hear, it's what's happening that you need to deal with.
Yes.
Um, and Rachel Maddow, I caught a clip of her saying, number one, people say I look like her. I don't really know how I feel about that.
People saying short hair, like, you don't actually look like Rachel Maddow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, she seems like a lovely individual, but at the same time, no. Someone was like, "You're a straight doppelganger," and I was like, "I don't know what to do with that, so have a good day," and then just kept going. Um, but I saw this thing with her, and she was like trying to appeal to Trump's ego, because she was like, at the end of all this, you're not going to want to be blamed. So please pick someone to blame. Pick someone who knows what they're doing and give them this job to fix the economy, fix, everything that's going on with COVID-19. Pick someone to blame, because they're going to take care of it and they're going to be strong enough to take the blame. And of course, I'm not going verbatim because I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was the gist of it. Like, you can't handle this, so give it to someone who can.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the epitome of, one, playing to an ego, and two, narcissism, and three, and most importantly, giving way to saying that, like, okay, intelligence is not happening, so hand it to someone who can. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't think we have ever really figured out what to do with intelligence or how to gather it properly.
No.
And I'm not going to go off on intelligence, but there are a couple books written by Tim Weiner, and he wrote, he was a New York Times journalist.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
He wrote Legacy of Ashes about the CIA, and Enemies, the history of the FBI. Phenomenal. They recount all of these blunders that have occurred, and particularly the aura that was manufactured around the CIA of, like, oh, these are suave guys, like, super efficient at gathering intelligence, kind of like these I don't know if cosmopolitan is the word, but basically, like, almost
I know
like
what you mean, though.
types that are, like, good in all these different situations, and they just are phenomenal at gathering intelligence. It was like one blunder after another. It wasn't even intelligence gathering. It was literally like assassination attempts, rigging elections, and covert ops. One covert op after another. Cash handouts to people, buying elections. There was actually minimal intelligence gathering. So
You know the website Stumble Upon?
yeah,
Kind of think that that's how, like, a lot of government stuff happens.
pretty.
Just like, oh,
It's a pretty
there you
good way of
go.
putting it. Yeah. Yeah.
Like that. It's just like, oh well, I found this. Seems like a solid idea. Maybe, maybe not. We'll let it play out, see what happens. oh, we fucked over a lot of people. Just kidding, we didn't do it.
In the U.S. was chasing ghosts throughout a lot of the 20th century during the Cold War, and that like the Soviet Union was portrayed as like this extremely powerful and prosperous, like we are screwed over at any moment, and they were like an anemic struggling economy, and like we were kind of the aggressors most of the time, where it's like we would build up our arms because all of our military advisors and the generals in the war room would be like, we need this, and then like Khrushchev would be like, well, fuck, I guess we've got to build up another 7,000 missiles to keep up with this, because in and we found out later on that the Cuban Missile Crisis, like, it wasn't actually Kennedy staring down Khrushchev and Khrushchev being like, okay, I'll withdraw the missiles. There was a backroom deal done by Bobby Kennedy to remove our missiles from Turkey. And that was
Yeah,
legitimately the reason why Khrushchev felt the need to put missiles in Cuba in the first place, is because our missiles were in Turkey, right at the edge of the Soviet Union. And not only did the Kennedy family cover up that this backroom deal was done, until this only came out like 6 years ago or 8 years ago that this actually is the official
yeah.
history, but we were actually, the Kennedy administration was denigrating this idea of like getting our missiles out of someplace else, and sort of downplaying that they even existed, and was like, oh, that would be weak if we did that. No, we're gonna still. So it's like this machismo. Ugh.
It's the whole alpha
Yeah.
thing that we were talking about last week, but there's so many times that I see stuff now, and because like I start thinking about it on different levels now, not like I'm a great thinker,
Yeah.
very emotionally stable thinker.
Mhm.
But no, there's stuff that I think about now that, like, when did I mean, this might be a very stupid question because I know it's been a long time, but like, maybe not even when. Why did government have to become a pissing contest? Honestly, like, if someone could answer that question for me, I feel like there would be the world would be such a different place.
Yeah, I think it might have to do with maintaining the power in institutions that exist. Like the coming out of a crisis, the magnitude of the Great Depression and World War II, we had to build these new institutions that really like encapsulated this new world order, where the US was like the only power, the only allied power that emerged that wasn't totally destroyed by the war. And so it shaped the global order that came out of World War II. And we had to establish all these institutions. And once people get employed by those institutions, they then unfortunately only see the system, or they only see life through the lens of their institution, and they become essential. And then it becomes these power plays between institutions. And when I say institutions, I mean like, the military, academia, the media, government, corporations, uh, you name it, any one of these things, the church. So I do think that you get people who are part of institutions and they say, no, I am absolutely essential, I am vital. They don't want to conceive of a world where they themselves or their institution are no longer needed as they once were. So the idea of like, okay, contracting the military after a major conflict, you have people go, no, no, we're essential, I'm essential, like I don't want to lose my job. Or so like whatever the institution is, you see this a lot, is people fighting for their continued relevance, basically.
For sure, and I think something that's unfortunate about the word institution is it gets kind of a shitty. It's almost like degradation for the word, because some institutions are good, like an institution of learning, an institution of uh, learning is the only thing that popped into my head, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, but if you say like institutionalized,
Mhm.
immediately your mind goes to like housing people that can't take care of themselves, or like a jail or something like that. And I think that it does a disservice to the word.
It sounds
almost
like a
because
bureaucracy too, right?
yeah, it does. I mean, there's a lot too that I'm noticing with just words in general and their overall power when it comes to power being in the right hands and power being in the wrong hands.
Yeah.
It comes down to a lot of the time it's very subjective the way that things are looked at and the way that words are taken and for words like institutions and things like that it really depends what you're talking about, which is unfortunate because it dumbs down and then also contorts the ability to use certain words without having this stigma attached to them.
Hmm. Yeah, and maybe that they're used to manipulate unengaged, non-free thinking or unintelligent people by their mere simplicity. Like if you are somebody who takes a monopoly on the simple words and concepts and ideas, and those ideas power or conjure powerful emotional responses from people, then you are like a master propagandist, essentially.
Exactly.
And it doesn't matter how many free thinking, nuanced people you have, you can always undermine them by appealing to like as big of a mass of people as possible and swaying that mass in the direction that you. It's sort of man v mob.
Yeah. Oh, look at that full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting too because like I'm just thinking about the word institution, right? If you say I'm I want to someday go to Yad Vashem in Israel, which is like the preeminent institution for Holocaust studies.
Hmm.
That's where all the world leaders go when they get to Israel. I'll talk about it some other time. But saying I'm going to this institution to me means, oh wow, you're going to an institution in Israel. To someone else is like, oh shit, um, that's not good,
Yeah.
you know. So that word alone, and then there's just popped into my head, patriotism.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that are very hesitantly patriotic because there's love of country versus love of government.
Yeah.
And like you can say like, okay, yeah, I love America, but you don't want to be associated with I love all of America's ideologies.
Yeah.
Uh,
You're
so I
sort of
mean
a
like
mindless lover of things, right? You
yeah,
love
yeah,
your consciousness.
yeah. It's like I love in America that I am a woman and I can vote and I can speak relatively freely. Um, and I say relatively just given the current government, and then I have to put a codicil on the things that I'm saying.
Mhm.
So it's that hesitant patriotism. It's words like that. It's like those kind of buzzwords
Hmm.
that'll get a rise out of someone that really, for from my perspective, are the things that like those are your sorry
Okay.
finals, man. um those are like the buzzwords that are going to get the rise out of people, but you don't know kind of what rise you're going to get until you're there.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I think that both sides play off of each other's like what they can get a rise. I mean, this isn't really a compelling thought, but like I was thinking recently, for example, how the left has gone after the right for like if you don't agree with us, then you're like a bigot,
Yeah.
um, and then that has become very apparent over the last couple of years with the rise of like the intense social justice warrior types, right? But then on the other side, because you have like the more right-leaning conservative types, like, yeah, see, you're the ones that are irrational and emotional and all that. And I'm just like, hold on a second. Your side is the one that if somebody says like, hey, I really question this like foreign policy, it's like, what are you, not patriotic? Like just
Yeah.
like one side can if somebody questions like I don't know about this welfare policy, or like I don't know what you're saying about like different races or whatever, like what you're your different arguments are. Could we talk about this a bit more? It's like, what are you, a racist or a bigot? It's like,
Yeah.
no, not necessarily that person is. Let's be a bit more nuanced than that. But the same thing on the other side, it's like, no, just because you question like the military or anything like that doesn't mean you're anti-patriotic or something like that. But
Yeah, it's I think it's when you get to the extremes of either side. Like I'm a very liberal individual. You know, I like I've said it before. I don't care who you are, who you love, you know, what you're doing, as long as it's not like sacrificing a goat, because then I have some questions. But other than that, um, you know, I'm very live and let live.
yeah.
But it's when you get like way over to the extreme side of really either, that's when I've got some questions. Like I like to say the alt right is all wrong,
Hmm.
because they're you're so far over there. It's like talking to a brick wall. You can't get through it, and you can't even, it would be impossible to kind of have like a civil disagreement,
Yeah.
let's call it, or even just an exchange of
A
opinions.
vast chasm in between that you're
Yeah,
trying to cross, basically.
yeah, because like I don't go out of my way to argue with people that think differently than me,
Hmm.
but nobody has the same, you know, interworkings that I do mentally. Like, I mean, you and I might think very similarly on the same path, but that does not make us the same. You know, we're all our own people. But if I'm willing to listen to certain things and then be like, all right, you're nuts, I'm out. But then there's also like, you know, people hold different opinions on everything, and that's fine. Whatever. As long as you have somewhat of an open mind, it's you hold the capability to have a perceptive conversation.
Hmm.
If you don't, not only are you making yourself a pariah, whether you meant to or not, uh, you're you're really limiting your ability to do anything that can be construed as positive,
Mm.
because you take these ideas, which everyone's allowed to have.
Hmm.
Everyone's allowed to have their ideas, and that's fine. Everyone's allowed to have their beliefs, and that's fine,
Yeah.
no matter how ass backwards they may be. Um, but you really wall yourself off to any opportunity to kind of grow as a person and grow in any intellectual way, be it scholarly or just, you know, for the sake of knowledge.
Mm.
And I think when people have to go out of their way to say like, "Oh, I'm all the way to the right," or "I'm all the way to the left," um, instead of just I am.
Yeah.
I'm just a person. You know, like
We have to
that's when
define ourselves relative to these terms that are ultimately sort of like meaningless and not fully agreed upon, right? Like all of these terms, all these isms, all of these like um whatever, left, right, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, progressive, alt-right, whatever, like people define them differently and they use them differently. And so,
right.
like, if the conversation essentially doesn't start with people defining the terms and coming to a common agreement on what they mean by the terms, then they're probably not going to come to an agreement down the line as the things that they talk about get more complex.
Exactly.
Um,
Um,
so go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna agree with you on that. You know.
Yeah, it's sort of sad because I think we're stuck in this dichotomy that was, and this is relevant to the Cold War, is like, so it used to basically just be liberals and conservatives, and they fell fair, those ideologies fell fairly neatly into the vessels of the Democratic and Republican parties,
Yeah.
with some intermixing. Like you had liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats and things like that. But liberalism, as it is classically defined, classical liberalism, was the belief system of the founding fathers of the country. It was ideas that came out of the Enlightenment, individual liberty, uh, law, rule of law, property rights. It was basic
The Homestead
concepts
Act, whatever.
surrounding liberty, basically. And were they like saints in how they practiced? Like, no, they had slaves. There were plenty of contradictions, but that was the ideal. Generally, people fall short of ideals. Um, that doesn't mean you give up on the ideals, that you try to get as close as possible. So that was liberalism. And then that actually, ironically, became the thing that conservatives wanted to conserve, was the thing that the liberals, the original liberals, the founding fathers, had created, this new system. The conservatives at the time were probably like, this new idea, a United States, you want to have this new thing based off these ideas? This is crazy. So like that was probably the conservatives back then, but
Yeah.
conservative is always relative to what you're conserve, right? So
Right.
in the Cold War, conservatism really came into its own in the sense of it was defined principally based on its opposition, which was communism. And so you think about hardcore firebrand conservatism, it was protecting what was the opposite of godless communism. Communism was a system that focused on having a international proletariat, right? Like a workers' world, and
Yes, sir.
not having religion. These are some of its more core principles. And conservatism was like, no, Christianity. We're going to have heavy focus on the family, community. We're going to have an emphasis on a capitalist style system, or like a free market system, whatever, and just defined itself in opposition to communism. So
Right.
when the Soviet Union eventually collapsed, its primary enemy was like, how do you define yourself without your primary enemy? And that's what a lot of American institutions are trying to figure out. Like, how can we define ourselves? What is our purpose if our enemy no longer exists? Like a lot of these institutions were built with the idea of communism being the enemy and pushing against it. Um, and so I bring this up because, and by the way, like we're wrapping up now. We'll get into the bulk of. We'll have a part 3, but the
Me
new
and Gene
ideologies
Rob plus Sarah shows up a lot.
exactly the new ideologies that came out when the Soviet Union collapsed were neoliberalism and neoconservatism, and so
And neo
those,
just means new,
it
which
means
is what
new,
people
but they are
cite
quite
them.
different. It's like this entire
Very much so.
world. Uh, the concept of the New World Order, the context of like, okay, now the United States is the only one left standing in this post World War II, post Cold War era. What do we do now?
Yeah.
So these ideologies become very important, and they're integral to the system that we now live under. People still think it's classical liberal versus what we call paleo conservatism, which is
Yeah.
what existed during the Cold War. No, it is now neoliberalism and neoconservatism versus those sort of traditional views. So that's why you
Right.
have this populist backlash. You have a lot of this military industrial complex going on. But
Which we will actually get to.
yeah, yeah.
I
But
it's
it's
funny.
getting late to discuss
It
in
is.
detail and follow these stuff.
It is. It's funny because like we go into it like, yeah, we're gonna talk about this, and then it's just like
Yeah, completely.
yeah. I I had said like, oh yeah, I'm recording with Pat tonight, and someone was like, all right, talk to you in like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, pretty much. I got the
Yeah.
reputation now.
No, it's a decent one though, because like, the people that have listened to it. I actually have a friend that just listened to the first podcast I did with you on narcissism, and she texted me and she was like, "This is amazing." I was like,
That's what we want. That's great.
"Yeah, yeah." It's always fun, because you get to talk about the things that like nobody wants to talk about, or if they do, they're very quiet about it. And I still think my idea is phenomenal. Just to, when we finally are allowed out of our houses, go to a coffee shop, Just sit down and have just a normal conversation about like the stuff we talk about now.
Yes.
Just see how long until someone's like, "What the fuck is going on over there?"
Yeah, this is basically a kind of intense distillation of all these things that you and I have researched and read and studied and the opinions that we have. And so like I commend people who just come into this out of curiosity and decide to have a listen, because it's probably like getting hit with like a bunch of bricks in the face with in the density of the context or the of the things that we talk about.
Yeah, because we really run the gambit. We do. We find a topic and then a subtopic and then some other subtopics, and then before you know it, it's like, hold up, someone grab a ladder because we are way down there in the rabbit hole of like this one idea.
Yeah. So there is an absolute irony in that we entered tonight being like, we'll talk about the military industrial complex, that we went on a bunch of tangents and basically set the stage. This is like the Two Towers, where next time is going to be the Return of the King. So
Exactly. Exactly. And then
prepare, because it's going to be epic.
one day we'll kick it back to we've like high school. Just talk solely about high school. And there's The Hobbit. It's the prequel.
Yes. We'll hope that they hold up a little better than what the less CGI. We'll do less
Yes.
CGI.
Yeah. I want to like when our conversations are done, I don't want to be dizzy and kind of like what just happened. Like I want to be able to go back to it and just be like, hold on. Like I don't need to pause it to like, regain and like get rid of the vertigo.
Yes. So
But
okay, I'm hoping that later on this week, maybe Tuesday, we can record part 3. If
yeah, no, Tuesday because I have class tomorrow. And then what's Tuesday? Tuesday's the
26th, 7th, 8th, 28th.
oh my god, my last 2 of my classes, that's their last day is the 29th. So I'm just gonna kind of be
Screw up your final schedule.
oh no. I mean, I'm just gonna be kind of sitting here like, oh my god, it's almost over. You but no, I actually I finished one of my research papers today. I'm very happy about, and I have another one to do for history, but I'm actually just very excited about writing that one because it's about the Holocaust, so kind of ready.
You're one of the. I think that people are going to get used to you saying you're excited about something and it's related to the Holocaust. It's not common that you hear people saying that.
Yeah, it's a little weird because I think I've said this to you before, but like I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking about the Holocaust, which is not a common sentence,
Oh yeah,
and people like if I say that to someone, they'll be like, okay,
yeah. They're like,
see
"Are you a
ya.
lot older than you look? Are you like 110?"
And it's like, yes, it's the Neutrogena actually that's kept it going on so well. But no, it's just when you find that niche, whether it's one thing or an amalgamation of a lot of things, and anybody who is like looking for something to hold on to, doesn't matter what it is. Find something as long as it's not like mass murder that you want to do.
Mhm.
Find something and just like grab onto it, even if everyone else is like it's been overdone or it's a weird topic or it's a really dark topic like neo-Nazism.
Yeah.
Hold on to it because you're gonna find that thing that you want to devote your time and energy to. And it doesn't mean you can't do other things. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
people look at me and assume that, I'm not doing much of anything. I have tattoos all over my arms, and I'm I walk around with a pretty
You're
serious
a
case.
vagrant.
Yeah, I walk around in stupid t-shirts and tight jeans with like resting bitch face, and like,
I have
but
a resting bitch face equivalent, by the way. I think that I have a stern expression that I need to work on.
I don't know. Like, I mean, I like to think that I just kind of look like I'm thinking, but I know that I'm not. At least, like, or I know I'm thinking, but I know that's not how I look. I
Yeah.
just like one of my favorite memories is I worked at a summer camp, and it was my first day. My hair was a lot shorter. I used to wear a faux hawk, and 3-4 year ago, Sarah, you're an idiot. You looked like an idiot. But I used to wear a faux hawk, and I walked in. I was brand new. I was wearing a tank top, that had the house from Up with the balloons, and it just said adventure is out there, and people were legitimately afraid of me because I had the tattoos and the short hair and just like resting bitch face.
That's a lot. That's an interesting mix of things.
Yeah, it
That's.
was
I
like
think that might be why people are like, I'm not going to be as interesting as this person.
I don't know about that. I mean, it could just be like minor childlike whimsy and terrifying. And I had a lot less tattoos then too. Like I didn't have the half sleeve and
Yeah.
stuff. Like I there are pictures from then too that I wish those weren't there.
Like if Disney met Eileen Wuornos, maybe.
Maybe not that bad, but God, if I ever sound like that, like you are well within your rights to be like, all right, this one needs help. Who do I call?
Uh,
Uh,
okay,
yeah.
so we will officially end the recording here, and we will pick this up in a couple days. People, you will get a third part this week coming to you.
And as always, I will promote it on my social media, and it will be freaking delightful.
Thank you for doing that. And I dropped the ball last week, so I will be promoting it too.
Don't worry about it. I did my best.
Good
I
job.
did what I could.
Good night, sir.
Good night, Pat.